Welcome everyone back to Educator Diaries. I'm Chantel and I'm joined with my beautiful friend Maria.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 8, Communication Development for Young Children. How do I know my child needs speech therapy? Well, we're fortunate to have our guest speaker today, Emily Mackie, who is our speech pathologist. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Emily, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. So I have been a speech pathologist or therapist, they mean the same thing, for the last 15 years. I'm based out of Western Sydney in New South Wales. I have worked in lots of different settings. I've worked in schools, childcares. I've worked with educators in hospitals, doctors, and I now have my own private practices, which I've almost had them for 10 years now.
Oh,
so
wow.
I have one in the Hawkesbury and one in Tuggerah. And I also have an online business where I mentor speech pathologists and educators all over the world.
Oh, wow. It sounds like you're really busy.
Yes,
So thank you for joining us.
I have 2 young girls at home as well. So they're 3 and 15 months. So definitely keep me
wow.
on my toes.
Very busy, very busy. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again for coming today and spreading, the valuable knowledge and information for our listeners. It's something that, as a parent, that there's many questions that we always want to know, from when our children are young about communication and speech development. So this will be great, everyone.
Yeah. So what areas do children need to develop, to communicate successfully? Let's just start off with probably those basic skills.
Yeah, so essentially communication, or the skills for communication, happen from birth with children, and they take them all the way through the lifespan, and those skills develop. So I typically work with children from 18 months of age up till about 18 years of age. So there's a lot of skills in there. So the common things that we're looking at are pronunciation or articulation, which is speech sounds. Children need to be able to speak clearly. We also work with language. So that's one of my areas that I'm passionate about. So can children understand what you're telling them, and can they express themselves and tell you their thoughts?
Yep.
Another area we look at is fluency or stuttering. So most people know The King's Speech, that movie. That's a good example of stuttering.
Brilliant movie.
Yeah.
Although the methods I'm not sure about.
Oh, okay.
Very old-fashioned, but that's what they do back in the day.
Yeah.
So we, if children are having problems with their fluency, then we work with that. If children have voice disorders, so that's the quality of their voice. Sometimes they can have vocal nodules.
Like
or
husky type
that.
voices and things like that. Yep.
Yeah, we work with that. It's not as common, but we can definitely work with that condition. I had a little girl once who always lost her voice, and we had to work on improving that.
Wow.
Yes.
It's like a strain or something like that.
Yes,
Okay.
And that's not normal for children at that, to have any vocal damage, but it can happen.
Wow.
And then we also work with feeding. So that's a big area. If children are picky eaters, fussy eaters, they only eat white food or textures,
Yes.
that is a big area of speech therapy, but we often work with other professionals as well. So OTs, or there are specialised feeding programs. So we do work with those people as well. And we then, a big area is literacy. So once children start school, we work with reading, writing, spelling, reading comprehension, their auditory memory, executive functioning, all of those things that make them good at academics and good at school, those language skills and literacy skills that they need, we work with that.
So it's more than just the speech, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because I think a lot of parents think, my child needs speech therapy, meaning it's because they're not articulating words as such, or they're not talking, but there's the whole range, is it under that banner of speech pathology, communication and speech and, various sort of factors that you work
it's
on.
essentially communication.
Yep.
So it's the other area is social thinking. It's sort of a bit of an old-fashioned term now, but most people know it as social skills.
Right.
But we sort of work on those social thinking principles as well, which is, I need to look at you, I need to take my turn. All of that goes together to make a child really good at talking and listening
and communicating,
having relationships and connection, which is what life's all about.
Yeah. So a common question that I get asked a lot, through my childcare days and what have you, is why isn't my child talking? Is there certain things that, obviously there'd be more than one thing. I know there's some children that would have maybe born a certain way, so therefore obviously, like I said, my daughter having a cleft lip, I knew, and palate, I knew from day dot that she was going to need speech therapy, but I'm sure there are other things that cause
Yeah, it's like every parent always asks that question, and I can relate. Like if there's anything wrong with my children, I always think, why is this happening?
Yeah.
A lot of mums ask that question because they think it's them, and that's the first thing I say to them.
Right.
It is not you. Like sometimes there's nothing more you could have done or should have done. It's just the situation that we're dealing with. So that's number one. If any parents out there thinking, why has this happened?
Yeah, did I not read to them
yourself.
enough? Like while they were in utero, did I not play the Mozart music?
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
There's lots of things like that. It's like, no. We just actually need to look at the situation and like move forward.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't serve anyone. But essentially there are different factors or contributing factors, but we can never say, yes, 100% this is what has made your child fall behind, or this is what has caused your child to have this issue in this area. But I mean, common things are if you have a traumatic birth, sometimes if there's a lack of oxygen at birth, or there's difficulties in the labor or the pregnancy, sometimes those things can contribute, but again, may or may not. It can be in their development, like overall development. So some children have a delay, like a global delay with all of their skills. So that sort of can happen. You know, some children get different diagnoses across their lifespan. They might have autism, Fragile X syndrome, like obviously different things with chromosomes. They can all come into hand in hand. But even if your child has autism, it doesn't mean that they will have a speech or language delay.
Yeah.
Every child is different. And just because they have a diagnosis, you know, you need to look at the individual child, the unique child in front of you, because every child's unique.
That's exactly
And you probably
right.
find too, like I know, like even with Paris, obviously because she had the cleft, but with the cleft came hearing issues. So I know even at the preschool, if parents would come to me, that was normally a bit of like a first port of call, go and get their hearing checked, make sure that they don't have glue ear and like things like that as well, I guess
really
would
common.
also,
If that's what's one of our recommendations.
Is that like a
Children
first step if
can't
someone
do
comes
that.
to you, like have you had the hearing checked, get rid of dummies, bottles, things like that as well?
Yes. So definitely the hearing. And I think I have a freebie on that on my website. Actually, I did a post about that on social media not long ago about the hearing thing, and that's what educators can recommend as a first step. If any parents concerned, because that's what a speech therapist will recommend as well. If a child can't hear the sound, you can't expect them to be saying the sound.
That's right.
They can't hear what's communication is. How can they then develop that skill? So, and it is really common that children have middle ear infections or ear infections or grommets. It's really, really common. So that is a good thing to get ruled out.
Cool.
Dummies, the jury's out on it.
Oh, okay.
It traditionally, you know, it was like, yes, this may impact, but there's been a lot of new research out saying dummies don't impact. And
Oh, there you go.
It's each to their own. Like
Yes.
being a mum, I completely understand. It's like put that dummy in if they need to sleep. My first daughter had a dummy up until she was 2, and she speaks perfectly.
Right.
There's no issues.
Okay.
My other daughter didn't take a dummy, and there's not much you can do about it. Like if your child
and
needs
it's hard
doesn't
too.
need one,
That's right, because you don't want to replace the dummy with a thumb, because I remember that being a big thing. Like, you know, and you do sometimes see some of those children with the teeth and what have you issues from the thumb. So it's, like...
I mean, I think with the dummy, I was just very strict. I was like, it's only at bed. We're not having it through the day.
So not talking, like trying to talk with a dummy in their
No,
mouth.
And that would be a thing. If your child is having it all through the day and then they're talking while they've got the dummy in the mouth, that's a big no-no.
Yes.
So I've treated children in speech therapy and their speech sounds like garbled.
Yeah, like they've got something in their mouth. Yeah.
And they sound like they've got a hearing impairment, but I'm like, it's actually they've had a dummy. And then you look inside their mouth and it's actually not very healthy for the teeth. They develop with an open bite or an overbite, which is when the teeth are not symmetrical.
Right.
And, you know, that's their baby teeth. I'm not a dentist, but
Yes.
as they get the adult teeth, they don't know whether that affects them, and you don't want to be then adding to your bills.
Yeah, with orthodontics.
The dentist is not cheap. So, you know, it's getting that out. But it's also just looking at the tongue. With a dummy, the tongue is constantly coming out, which sometimes leads to a lisp, but sometimes doesn't. So, but it's just being aware of that. If your child has a really strong lisp, so they're saying like TH, like snake, like with the tongue out, get rid of the dummy immediately.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
But, you know, but then in saying that, my daughter had a dummy and doesn't have a lisp.
Yeah.
But we got rid of it by 2. I'd say definitely by 2, get rid of it.
There you go. Yeah. So I think that's, that's a really good point to make as well. Yeah. We don't want to see any 14-year-olds walking around with dummies. But Emily said it's fine. No.
No, definitely by 2, and have very clear boundaries and very strict rules around it.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good.
So what age is there a concern? Like as a parent, you go, if we eliminate sort of the areas of the obvious of, my child's being diagnosed or, was born, with a neurological disorder as such, and if we leave that aside and we've got just your typical neurotypical child, what age would you look at saying, oh, there's a concern there? So what age, as a parent, that you go, okay, my child's 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, what's the age that...
In my experience, mostly from 18 months.
18 months, right.
12 to 18 months.
Okay, right.
We like to see children, if they have a problem for speech therapy, from 18 months because their physical development has happened and their cognitive development has happened.
Right.
It's given them a little bit of an opportunity. When we're looking at language and speech, 18 months.
Right.
Prior to that, they may need speech therapy if they've got feeding issues, like
Yes.
breastfeeding
Yep.
or eating issues. That would be why you'd see a speech therapist prior. But 18 months. So at 18 months, your child should be saying new words every day.
Right.
They don't need to be clear, but they need to be consistent. So my little one, she's 15 months. She will say da. She's not saying daddy. I'm not expecting her to say daddy.
Yeah, right.
But it's a consistent word every time she sees him. So
Yes, she's labelled him.
They should have consistent words, and they should be able to start copying you at 18 months. So that's a very important skill in actions. It doesn't have to be in words. Like if you're waving, they're sort of engaging.
That communication
Yes.
again.
Yeah, they're aware of what's happening around them. If they're not, engaging and copying you, if they're not looking at your face and looking at what you're doing with your, with your lips and your tongue and your teeth, that would be an area of concern. But essentially by 2, children should be starting to put 2 words together in a simple way. So they should be starting to say more mum, more dad. So I find that's a really easy warning sign that parents should know about.
Okay, right.
If their child's not starting to put very simple combinations together at 2, that's probably looking at maybe seeing a speech therapist.
Okay. Right. Oh, that's great. That's great.
Or the only thing I would add in there though is if they're bilingual and if they're learning multiple languages, then they might be a little bit behind. They might not be putting 2 words together at 2. That's okay. We sort of have a little bit of a
leeway with that
because they're learning 2 languages.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
There's always exceptions to everyone.
I was going to say,
Like English, it's very difficult.
So what would be some of the common speech disorders in children?
So we've got language delay, which is receptive or an expressive language delay or disorder. So a delay means that a child is picking up what they need to be, but just maybe 3 to 6 months or 12 months behind. So
the milestone of it.
So for example, at 3, a child should be understanding the concepts of top and bottom, right? That's just a language concept. They may be understanding that at 4. So that's just 12 months behind. That's the delay. So they're still picking up the concept, just slower. A disorder is when children are doing things that are not typical at any age.
Oh, right.
So a good way to think about this is with pronunciation. So when children are saying their words, I once saw a child for speech therapy and they only spoke in vowels. They had no consonants in there.
Oh, wow.
So they came in and they were saying to me, I eat, I eat. And that was I eat ice cream.
Wow.
And so that is a very extreme example.
Actually so clever, but I couldn't even try and do that.
Hard.
Yeah.
How do you do this? And so the child's saying to me, I eat. And the mum's saying, that's ice cream. I eat ice cream.
Wow.
So they've got no consonants in there. So that is not typical at any age. So that is a very good example of a disorder.
Right.
So you've got 2 different areas. So if a child has a disorder, immediate speech therapy straight away. And most educators and parents, they go, that's a bit funny. They kind of have a gut feeling. That's how parents describe it. Go, this is not, I look at other kids around them and I just think, no, doesn't feel very normal. This doesn't feel right. If you have that feeling, I'd encourage you to go and speak to your doctor or a speech therapist. So if we're then taking it back to delays, you can have a receptive and expressive language delay. They're just maybe not putting words together. They're not saying different types of words. Their grammar might be a little bit off. They're not following instructions or understanding what you're asking them to do. Speech sounds, it might be the sounds are not clear.
Yep.
So they might be saying tat instead of cat, and they need help getting the
sound out. Yeah.
Those sorts of things. With stuttering, that's pretty obvious. They just start repeating their words. In saying that, there can be a bit of a grace period there. They might be having a growth spurt, or they might have actually had a significant trauma. Happen, or they might like just be processing everything all at once. Like my daughter has started to repeat herself, but I'm not concerned about it because it's just a developmental spurt for a month and then it comes good.
Okay. Right, okay.
So they say that if it's impacting the child socially, like if they're having anxiety, to get onto stuttering
or behaviorals and things like that.
Straight away. But if it's not impacting them, then we sort of just wait and see and monitor that, maybe like a month or two.
Because sometimes too, you can find that some children do things for an attention thing as well. They might do it once or twice, and depends on the parent or the educator's reaction. They're like, oh, I got a little bit of a rise out of that, or I got some attention from that, so I'm going to make these funny sounds all the time or whatever. So like I have, seen that before as well. So, but so so if a parent does have a concern, what's the pathway basically into speech therapy? Like,
so essentially you can go to a private practice, which is what we have, or you can go to a community health service, which is a public service. So private practice you have to pay, whereas public service, that is free. There's pros and cons with each. It generally comes down to waiting lists and things.
Yes.
Do you need a referral or anything like that, or they can just call? Or
no, they don't need a referral. No, they can just call. So I would just be Googling your community health centre in the area. But even your community health centre, they'll be able to give you all of the information. So they might even recommend privates in the area that can help you, or just the general steps. But essentially anyone can refer. So parent, grandparent, auntie, uncle, as long as the parent is, aware. But yes. Anyone can refer, and then you can go to your doctor, and they can give you a Medicare plan for a rebate. That would be why you visit the doctor, but you don't need the doctor for a referral.
Okay.
Right.
And then essentially what we do is we'd bring them in for an assessment, and we'd have a look at most of the areas of development like we've spoken about, to identify, yes, this needs help, or this area is okay. We generally then talk to the preschool or the school. We like to get a bit of a holistic picture. We'll talk to other professionals as well. We then take reports. Any information that you can bring to your or about your child to the assessment is going to help us in giving you as clear answers as possible. We'll then do an assessment, and that tells you where your child's at. So, if they have a disorder, a delay, a diagnosis, and then we sort of guide you what you need for therapy. So it might be weekly therapy, fortnightly therapy. You might need school visits, home visits, centre visits. You might need resources. Like, it's very different. If your child's not speaking, then you need a different form of communication. Whereas if your child's speaking, you might have a bit more of a different therapy approach with.
Different. And with so for those families out there that this is like their first child, they've never had this issue before with any other previous children, whatever. Cost wise, so from memory, obviously if you go through the private sector, there's it's not covered by any healthcare, private insurance or anything like that. From memory, like when I went through private or public? No, private. So if they went through, there's I don't think your health cover.
So your private health fund. So you can get a rebate through Medicare, which you can get an enhanced primary care plan, which is 5 sessions per calendar year.
Right.
They give you $52 back. So say your out of pocket fee is $80. So say the consult is $85. You would then pay the gap. That.
Yep.
Your private health fund can cover, but it depends what level you're on your private health.
Right. Okay.
So generally, most parents come in and they use it, and it'll pay between $30 to $40 for them.
Okay.
But
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
So is the costing with speech therapy, and basically what's an average sort of cost for someone to come in and get?
It does vary based on your location. People in the city or the city, they charge a lot more to if you're rural. And it also is whether you have to charge for travel as well to so therapists are now charging travel
if they go to
say they're rural,
right,
they have to go out to see them or whatnot, and it depends. There are a lot of mobile therapists, so some therapists can come to your home, but generally you have to pay that travel.
Yeah,
so
fair
we
enough.
don't do that. We just have in-clinic visits. It would range anywhere from say we were talking about 30 minutes, from $85 to $120, and that's what I mean. It's a huge price range, and it also depends on where you live in Australia as to what your price is.
Well, I think that's the general thing, even with, again, bringing it back to childcare fees, depending on where you live, the fees can be very, very different, and that's that's quite common, I guess.
The other thing is you have NDIS funding, which is a national thing.
To you. Yes. So do the sessions go for half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour? How does that work out with?
It really depends on the child.
Right.
So most of our children who are 2, they would be half an hour, and that's their maximum attention. So maybe even 20 minutes.
Before they've destroyed the office.
Therapy is quite intense as well. We get in there and it's all about getting the child to learn. It's all through play. Literally, a lot of parents come in and think we're playing with the child, but that's the beauty of therapy. They don't know. Yes. Because it's just it's done so naturally to engage a child, because that's how they learn. That's how their brain is wired.
Yes, I'm glad you've said that. I always, whenever a child gets any type of therapy, the most important part is the engaging part with the child, because if you don't have that connection to engage with a child, you're not going to get the best out of that child and in order to help that child. I see a lot of therapists, in different areas in the industry, and if even like a psychologist, if you don't have that engagement, that child's not going to open up to you and to give you a clear indication of where you're heading to sort out a plan to help that child. So that's
100%. Trust is key.
Yeah, I remember when Paris did speech for years. I remember sitting there watching it and going, "Hey, can I have a turn?" Because there were so many fun games and. And I know what you mean. As a parent sitting there, you might be thinking, "What are you actually doing?" And but it is. You can definitely see it's all play based, and just even those articulation things and going over things that with her speech therapist at the time. That they just had a ball. They had so much fun. So
Do you, just a question too, because with the children that I work with additional needs, I've got a boy that's nonverbal, and we're I'm working with him with his sounds. But I remember when my son was getting speech therapy that she used a mirror, which I thought was brilliant. Do you use that as part of any of your therapy?
Yeah, definitely, we can,
Because there's a bit of a yes and no between some speech therapists.
Oh, no, I would use whatever tool in my bag
and I think that works,
child.
Because when you're speaking, you don't exactly know how your mouth is moving when you're watching someone. And I remember it worked brilliantly with Jaden, and I used it with this little boy, and it's amazing how, all of a sudden just his eyes light up thinking, wow, I'm making that sound, that same movement.
Absolutely.
That's great then. That's great.
There's lots of different tools and tricks. Sometimes we lay kids on the floor to get them to try and feel the back of their throat. There's so many different things. We have models of the mouth, and they can actually feel the tongue on a mouth and see it. We'll use crocodiles and things that have big wide mouths so they can look in and see the teeth, or a mirror, a torch looking in their mouth. There's so many different. You need so many different tools because each child is different.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So they all have a different type of problem, and some of them might have certain sounds and other sounds, and it's every child is different. So
you've got to adapt really their program to them as well.
You've got to be flexible and work with the child.
Yeah.
So with getting back to parents that if they need to access speech therapy, I know through the centre that we had a lot of parents that were trying to get on waiting lists and things like that. So at the moment, are you still finding that that's a bit of an issue in your sector as well, that there are huge waiting lists for these children?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really... I think it's a difficult time. There's a lot of waiting lists everywhere. So I feel like it doesn't really matter where you go in Australia or what professional you're seeing, there's waiting lists.
Yeah.
And we are a smaller clinic compared to others, and we would have at least 6 months waiting list. We are getting it down, which is amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
But the bigger centres, I don't know when children would be seen, which is terrible because it doesn't I became a speech therapist to help children.
Yeah.
I didn't become a speech therapist to say, I'm sorry, I can't help
yeah.
you. And it breaks my heart every time we have a parent call up. And a lot of speech therapists have now just stopped taking phone calls. They've closed their books because it's just too disheartening. But then where are parents supposed to go? Where are children
And that's just it. How are they meant to? Because I know that through the preschool, the childcare centres, that, you know, educators are also wanting to know what to do with these children, because a lot of the times the parents are coming in, we would finally get the parents to go and see a speech therapist or try and put their name down, because even that's a really daunting conversation to have with a parent as well. So we'd finally get to that step, and then the parent would come in and say, oh, I can't see anyone for 6 months. And then as an educator, you're like, right, okay, what are we going to do with this child for 6 months so that they don't obviously go backward, and how can we help them to move forward? So, but I think you were saying earlier that you have a program or something like that you are starting to develop, or that you've put together as well, which was so exciting. And that's so can you just tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yes, I would love to. So, I mean, that's what I've sort of started to think is, how can we help children out of the four walls of the therapy room or the clinic, because we have a huge waiting list. It's a very big problem, and I am going into the childcares, working with the educators, and they have to deal on a daily basis with these children. And it's disheartening for them, because if a child can't communicate, they know that there's a problem, but they're like, what do we do? Yeah. So I have just very recently put together a new program called Language Unlocked, which is for educators, and it's giving them some of those tools from that tool bag we were talking about on how they can help children with language difficulties or disorders. So it's an 8-week course, but they don't have to do it over 8 weeks. It's self-paced, however they want to learn.
So is it like an online?
I have an online version, or I've started to do workshops with centres.
Yep, awesome.
And I go out and train the educators. It's very practical, very hands-on, because that's how people learn. We need to be able to do that. Yes. It's very good to learn all the theory, but it's like, what are we actually going to be doing tomorrow in our activities? So I've got lots of practical step-by-step ways that we can look at what we can do in our activities as educators, and how we can bring intentional language into the everyday moments. I know that educators are very busy. They have so much on their plate. I didn't want to add like another thing in
to become speech therapists on top of
I'm like, they're not the speech therapists. And that's the thing, a lot of them they are so valuable as educators, like they have such an important role, but there are actually some very basic things that they can do
and part of our programming that we'd always do is communication, language and literacy and all those things as well. So why not give that extra, like you said, that extra skill for them to program, because they're going to be programming for these children anyway. So why not educate them in the better way of doing things, I guess. So,
and it's all about being really intentional. And I think that's the key. It's when you're changing a nappy, and even with my daughters, I'm just very intentional. I don't try and do 1,000 things at once. I just am having those quality interactions, and I'm knowing what's expected at each age. And I'm also just aware of how she's communicating. And it's also just learning how to read children a little bit with their development. Okay. So that's what I teach in the course as well. How can you make your language appropriate for each child, but then also in a group. And like we talked about with play, that's how children respond. There's lots of things that we can do with our bodies, with our voices, with our intonation, with our faces, to actually engage them as well, even further in the play. Right. And sometimes you don't need toys. You don't need items. It doesn't need to be fancy. And that's what I say to parents. Like, my daughter's favorite thing is like rice in a old plastic bottle. She has all these toys. But it's actually what you do, how you're connecting in your relationship that actually improves their language. And that's what I focus on in this course, is what you specifically can do as an educator. So it's just in those everyday moments. But I've run it with a couple of educators and centres, and it's really helped them understand children and understand communication and how it develops. Yep. And they have found that with children in those baby years, like 2, maybe and under, that they just need a little bit of prompting, a little bit of intentional help, and then they're like, oh, we don't need to refer them to speech therapy anymore. Right. So that's what I'm trying to do, is break that cycle. With obviously some children do need speech therapy. That's right. That category. But if you've just got a child that needs a little bit more stimulation, that's where the educator is so powerful, and they are with them every day.
Yes.
That's amazing. Well, that's great that you've got this service that you're providing. So how do people log on? Whereabouts do they find you? And
Yeah, so I am Emily Mackie Speechy, so SPEECHIE.
Right.
You can find me on Instagram. I'm emilymackie.com.au. You can find me on Facebook. I have my clinics. You can find me through there. Speak about speech pathology.
Yep.
And you'll find all the information there for Language Unlocked.
Well, we'll obviously pop all that stuff on our website as well, like underneath the episode, so they can click on those links and find you as
That'd
well.
be great.
So
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for clarifying, all the different areas and under communication development for young children. And I hope that we've helped a few parents with questions they may have had. But thank you once again, Emily, for taking the time to have a chat with us.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed your time with us. And it was really good. And soon, actually, Emily will be starting her own podcast. And that's so make sure that you jump onto those socials with her as well and keep an eye out for that. So that will be really exciting as well. So good luck with that as well.
Thank you for having me.
So just before we go, I'll just leave you with this inspirational thought. Speech therapy is a work of heart. Every child deserves a voice. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.
See you guys. Bye.
Thanks, Emily.